then, Neale, thank you very much for joining me for afternoon tea today. And my first question to you, you've got your tea there.
I came prepared.
That's there. What was your childhood like?
Childhood was really good fun, to be fair. Although we were one of the first families where our parents got divorced, which nowadays you're the odd one out if they're not divorced, aren't you, I think. But other than that, yeah, everything was quite good. Enjoyed junior school, infant school, had good friends around, moved around a few different places. And then senior schools, I went to 2 senior schools. I went to Washwood Heath first, which was very much an inner city school, around about 1,800 pupils. And that helped me develop my love for sports even further. Because prior to going to senior school, I was regional champion in swimming and had set a national time at the age of 11. But yeah, then we went to Washwood Heath, and then with the divorce and everything else being finalised and parents moving around, I moved over to Curdworth and went to Coleshill Comprehensive, which was a real shock to the system because they'd kept most of the teachers that had been the comp. And it was a very, very different style of teaching. It went from being very interactive with young teachers to older teachers who were like, right, come in, sit down, nobody talks, and read paragraphs so and so from page to page. If anybody talks, then you're in detention. So that was a bit of a change. And also from going from an inner city to sort of a bit of a country bumpkin place, really, at Coleshill at the time. So it was quite a change. I don't remember having seen a rocker until I went to Coleshill, and I got on the coach as a bit of a mod. Well, not a mod, sorry, new romantic with the skinny tie and big shoulders on your blazers, thinking I was the bee's knees, and got into a coach full of rockers, which was quite interesting on my first day. But no, school was good, and I left with some good qualifications, and then went on to Solihull Technical College to do an OND in engineering.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so apart from the change in school and the different teaching, did you have any other problems at school?
Didn't like the authority too much, and that didn't help with parents who said that teachers were a waste of time. I hope there's no teachers watching this. They're not a waste of time. But I was taught to be a bit of a rebel, so I think that I've carried that through. I tend to challenge authority if I feel the need to. It's not just being a rebel for the sake of being a rebel or a mischief. I was always taught you've got a brain, use it. And if you feel you need to say something, then don't be afraid to. So I wouldn't say that's always served me well. I think as I've got older, I've learned to wield that sword a little better. Because yeah, I wouldn't say I was confrontational, but I loved a good debate. My stepfather, I class as my father, is a solicitor. And we grew up from a very early age having dinner parties on a Saturday and being encouraged to sort of join in with the conversations. And they loved a healthy discussion, which most people call arguments these days. You can't seem to have a discussion and have 2 opposing views without people throwing the toys out the pram, can you, these days?
You can't.
Like the American elections at the moment.
So, did you have any siblings?
Yes,
Were you the oldest or the youngest?
No, my mum said if she'd have had me first, I wouldn't have had a sister because I was the naughty one. She was the angel and I was the devil reincarnated. She's 13 months older, so we used to be extremely close. We're still very close now, and we certainly were very, very close through the divorce years because we found, I suppose, solace in each other. People can't help it, can they? They take sides. So when you're with one side of the family, they're running down the other side and vice versa. So we took a lot of solitude, comfort in being with each other. And then as children do, finding how to manipulate the parents when they're feeling bad.
And
But that
play
didn't work for long. Yeah, they were still talking to each other, so we couldn't quite get two lots of presents or things. But yeah, you try, don't you?
and play off one off against the other.
Yeah, it worked a couple of times, but then they realised what we were up to, thankfully, and that was nipped in the bud.
Yeah. Okay. So did you go to university? You said you went to Solihull Technical College. Did you go on to university afterwards, or?
No, the family were very keen for me to do that, but I've always been a hands-on person. And back then, all those years ago, I used to find that people who hadn't been to university and in a management role always held people with a degree with a high level of esteem. And they would often employ somebody with a degree because they thought they were better than them. But quite interestingly, it used to work in reverse as well. And a lot of the time when I was interviewed by people that had degrees, they were looking for people who were competent in what they did, didn't just have an intelligence. But no, after doing an OND in engineering and getting 2 distinctions in that, one of which I was very proud of, we had to build wing sections and test them in a wind tunnel, not a full-size one. And the invigilator that came in was the head scientist who designed the wings for the space shuttle. I didn't know that, and we were supposed to talk to them, make out we knew what we were on about. So I was waffling away. And then when they said afterwards he was this head scientist, I was like, I think he may have seen through some of my waffle, but I still got a distinction in that one. So I was quite chuffed with that. So no, I decided I wanted to get out into work. Whilst I was at college, on the Friday, the 13th of December, I took a job in a pub, the Red Lion in Knoll. And after the first night was made head barman. And then when I was finishing college, the assistant manager was leaving and I became assistant manager, and I was the youngest ever assistant manager for Ansell's.
So where did you go then from the pub trade?
Well, I went from there. One of the chaps that used to come in, and you have your regulars at, I think it was 5:30 then we used to open. And there'd always be a certain few that were sort of banging on the door waiting to get in, have a few pints before they went home to the other halves. And his friend was the managing director or the general manager of what used to be the Post House at Great Bar, that I think is a Hilton just off Junction 7 of the M6, that really weird roundabout set up on Junction 7. And he came into the pub one night for a drink with him, and within a week I'd had a contact from him, and he offered me a place on a graduate scheme, even though I didn't have a degree, with Trust House 40. So I went across there and I did some time there where I worked front of house in the a la carte restaurants and worked with the sommelier and front of house and silver service. My claim to fame was when Hello, the program was still doing well, they came in for their Christmas meal, about 50 of them. So we were serving them. They were good fun. And then so I worked in the kitchens as well. So I worked everything from the coffee shop side, where you could have anything from a 4-course meal to a snack. I ran that for, I think it was 4 months, and worked every other division within the kitchen, working with some amazing chefs that are trained all over the world. And I think the one thing I remember was making, this is true, 5,000 crepes on Pancake Day. And when I say crepes, I meant that if you could pinch them, they had to leave a hole. They were that thin. And I'd had to stack them in piles of 50, and the chef would come along, and if you picked one up and it wasn't good enough, the whole 50 went in the bin. So I probably made about 7,000 pancakes that day. I didn't eat pancakes for a while, I must admit. But it was good fun, and I did a lot with the conferencing side of that. But then the manager left and somebody else took over, was not happy that I wasn't a graduate on the graduate scheme, was trying to make things a little bit difficult. And then I decided to go into sales and started selling fax machines. That's how old I am. And that was going well until we had that postal strike all those years ago that lasted for ages, didn't it? And in the end, we were turning up at our distribution centre in the morning, filling our cars with fax machines and just driving around to estates and, have you got one yet? You haven't, right? You want this one, right? There you go. Which was great for about 3 months. We earned a fortune. And then, of course, we had no prospects afterwards. Everyone that was ever going to get a fax machine had one. And then I went on to work for Bowwater Scott, who are a subsidiary of the Andrex side on their industrial division. And I was a bit of a racehorse among shire horses, so I got a bit fed up with that one. And then went to work for a small telephone selling key systems for a company called, that was they're not around anymore, but they're owned by Siemens. And we used to sell more key systems, which are the small systems, than British Telecom. So that was quite good. That was a real jump up and getting more to that sort of executive sale. And at the age of, what was I then, 20, going on 21, I sold my first £1 million contract, which was, but it got stolen by the regional manager down south because they were going through some redundancies. And as I was made redundant, he was in charge down at that division. And when I inquired at what had happened, he'd snaffled the business and taken all the commission. So that was a bit of a kick in the teeth, but at least it showed I could do it. So that was good.
That's it. And if you can do it once, you can do it again.
Yeah.
So where did you go from there?
Oh gosh, this is really raking through the memory banks. So after them, I went on to, who did I go on to then? That company were called Norton Telecom. I think that's when I was working for them. I sold some products to a hotel or used to be a hotel in Knoll, just off Knoll High Street, called the Bank House. And the guy who owned it was turning it into a nightclub. And I used to run the Red Line in Knoll. He had already assigned a manager, and they opened, and within a month, he didn't think that the lady was up to scratch. So I was actually running a job and running the nightclub as well. And then gave up the sales to just run the nightclub for around about 12 months, which sounds fantastic, but is it boring going to the same nightclub 5 nights a week and seeing the same faces? So whilst I was doing that, I was applying for the police and saw a job with a company called Bristow and Souter to become a certificated bailiff. And I thought it could be a good grounding prior to going into the police. So I joined Bristow and Souter and became a certificated bailiff and worked at every level within that. Became a van team leader, a team leader, and was chasing up why I wasn't in with the police. It seemed to be taking an age. And found out that one of the companies I'd previously worked for had gone bankrupt and hadn't responded to their communications. And if I hadn't have interjected, I'd have never got into the police. So once I sorted that, I got into the West Mids, which the family were very proud about. And that's the main reason why I did it. And I did 5.5 years with the West Mids. And when I'd finished, unfortunately, I'd suffered post-traumatic stress disorder, having suffered quite a vicious attack whilst I was making an arrest. And that's when my whole life changed and my passion and my drive changed. First of all, to overcome PTSD and having a mental health disorder and all the stigma that was attached with that at the time. I mean, I remember a superintendent saying to me, you realise you do not have a future in the police. You will always be a beat officer or a shift officer. And left there and retrained as an aromatherapist, reflexologist, as a counsellor, nutritionalist, and started off in my quest to try and help people who were suffering with stress or stress-related conditions. Once I was well, I mean, they threw everything at me in the police. Trust me, I had well over 200 hours worth of counselling. I went to a convalescent home for 10 days, a 16-week anger management course, laughter courses, relaxation classes, meditation, because they didn't want me to make a claim So I was very, very lucky. I got lots of stuff that people never, ever get. So I count my blessings there. But I got that bad at one point. Twice I tried to check out. So, I went to a very dark place, and I was the sort of chap before I was ill. I hate to say it, but I used to think people who suffered mental health disorders were weak-minded fools who needed to pull the socks up and get on with it. That's what I'd always been taught. Why would I think any different? And it was a real wake-up call when you're suffering with this, and everything you have in your toolbox, everything you've had an experience in life prior to that point was helping not one jot. And I just got worse and worse and worse. When I recovered, as I say, I retrained. And for the last sort of 25 years, I've been trying to work within the field of health and well-being, or managing stress, to try and help as many people as I could that were suffering, with stress-related conditions.
So your first self-employment was obviously the aromatherapy?
It wasn't actually. The first job was when I was at the pub, because I was the assistant manager. We used to book all the functions, and the Red Lion in Knoll was really well known for doing weddings, and we could do 110 people sit down upstairs. And I looked, and we had a problem with a few DJs messing us around. So cut a long story short, I set up a DJ business with my best friend, a guy called Phil Colley. And he did the DJing, I did the bookings. His dad stood guarantor for us because we had to loan the money to buy all the equipment. And we made a nice bit of money on that, actually. The second time I was had a business was Aroma Relax. And very quickly after training, I became the therapist for what used to be the Acute Trust, Worcester Acute Trust. So through their occupational health departments, I used to treat the staff at all the different hospitals and work out of each of the different hospitals, and had a very, very, very successful. When I had to give that up, I was booked up more than 6 months in advance every day. But I had brought other therapists in as well to treat people, like bowing technique and a few other things. And then I set up a business called Morpheus Personal Development with a chap called Roger Edwards, and we specialised in personal development, but we were doing the organisational stress risk assessments that the HSE brought about in 2000, when they said mental health was as important as your physical health. So I spent 7 years with Roger working that, and it was going really well. We were the leading one in the country, worked with some huge clients, such as Birmingham Council, who used to employ 3 people to do this in-house. But when I contacted them, because we won the contract for the West Midlands organisational, what was the name of that group? It was to be the regional provider to all the councils within the Midlands, and we won the contract for that. So we worked with Birmingham Council, IMI Norgren, Bromsgrove Council was one of the councils that we did an audit for, and we did a lot of work with them, and then went on to do a load of training for them as well in sales. But as I say, it was going really well until Dame Carol Black, who I've met about 4 times, had dinner with her, delivered on stage, who's the Minister for Health and Wellbeing. And they changed their tack and said, it's nothing to do with stress. It's all about eating your 5 portions of fruit and veg every day. And all the companies then went, we don't have to do a stress assessment. Right, we're not doing one, because it showed more than a stress assessment. It showed the behaviours within their organisation and their culture, and that's what needed to be changed a lot of the time, the management styles, the way that the managers behave towards the staff. So when they didn't have to do that, they all jumped off that boat. And then shortly after that, we obviously had all the banks going, what's the word I'm looking for? We're just about to head into another one, aren't we? A recession. Thank you, Mandy. I was going to say depression, but that's the Americans, isn't it? Yeah. And a lot of people were treated badly and poorly by their companies. under the guise that, you know, they were having to make cutbacks. But because the power had been taken away from the HSE at that point, and it was all to do with this eating your fruit and veg, it sort of took a back seat again and killed the business. Absolutely. We lost about £75,000 worth of orders overnight. And when you've given your heart and soul and worked with every breath in your body to become the leading company in the country doing this, that really hit hard. But one of the he's now an ND of the Birmingham Hospital Saturday Fund, Brian Hall. He had become one of our customers, and we were providing a service to his customers. When I said I was closing the business down, and offered me a position with them, and I worked with them for around getting on for 3 years to develop their business services in-house and to involve occupational health and HR, and show to the board that there was a book of business within that field, because the Birmingham Hospital Saturday Fund does the business benefits. But they've got the health slant, obviously, because they pay for you. If you pay into it, you can get money towards your glasses or your dentistry or things like that. A carrot was dangled when we had our first meeting over lunch of a directorship, but that certainly didn't come off. And I found out they just bought their first occupational health business as I was leaving them. So another opportunity with a carrot dangled that was taken away. But you always learn from these things. So I enjoyed my time there, met some lovely people, and added to my skills, because I didn't know about company benefits and platforms and all that sort of thing, and how the insurance side of it, all of that worked. And they were a nice organisation. I mean, 135 years old, and they were around before the health service, National Health Service. I remember one of their photos on the wall, there was 2 tandems parallel to each other with a stretcher in the middle. So you'd have 4 guys on the bikes in uniform and the patients in the stretcher in the middle, and off they'd go. I love that picture. I thought that was fantastic. So they're one of the first ambulances ever built. And then from there, I had a spell of unemployment. And then I went back into the corporate world for about 8 months. I won't go into that one, but the company had been bought by investors, and I hadn't realized that I joined at about 3.5 years through, and they had a 5-year plan to sell the business. So just as you think you're doing really well, bye-bye, you're not needed anymore. And then another bout of redundancy, which I found really hard. Applying for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of positions, and going for interviews, being told, oh, you presented the best and the best interview. But because this isn't your sector, we've gone with somebody that's got a track record. And in all my years of business, I've never seen anybody come in and bring any business with them. But they stay safe by employing them, because if it goes wrong, obviously their neck is on the block, and it keeps them safe, doesn't it? So I left the corporate world around about 5.5 years ago, and I'd had enough of it all. And then about 2 years ago, my brain was like, this is great, you're de-stressed, you know, you're not hassled, but my brain's going, give me something to do. And I knew I wanted to be back in service with people. And that's when I took the decision to be a coach, when I fell upon the 3 principles from Syd Banks, and haven't looked back since, actually. And since then, I've set up Talk and Walk, where I work as a coach, working with specifically specialists with people that are suffering with stress and stress-related conditions. Although obviously as a coach, I can work with anybody that wants to achieve something in their life. But that's my field of my thin slice of expertise, as I like to think. And the difference is I don't tend to do Zooms or video or even in a room. I walk outside with my clients. So we have the power of nature on our side, and all the research that's been coming out over the last sort of 5 years or so shows the benefits for somebody who's suffering from anxiety or stress or depression, when they're actually out in nature. So why not use what's free to try and help them? And it works extremely well. Extremely well.
So what do you put your success down to? Is it luck, hard work, or something else?
I've seen a lot of other people have businesses and be lucky. I don't know if I would say it was luck. It's having a passion, being dogmatic, a lot of hard work, a lot of knockbacks. But it's staying true to that passion and true to yourself and having that confidence that what you're doing as a passion is the right thing for you. And I think if you can do that, although I wouldn't say it's not work. These people that say if you're doing a job you love, it's never work. You never do a day's work. I'm not quite sure about that, but it certainly feels good to be back in service to people and helping in an area where I've such a strong proven track record, having helped many thousands of people previously. So, but it's a bit weird after being out of it for such a long time, because it's like starting from fresh. And not having any sort of references or people giving referrals and stuff like that. So it's a bit of a slug. And even in the pandemic, and everyone said that, there's a lot of people suffering. It's not necessarily that easy still, because people are worried about whether or not they will have a job and spending money. And men, as I know, because I was one of them back then, are very skeptical to come forward, and I want to bring down the suicide rates in men. That's my real passion. That's what I really want to, in this next year, I want to really make a real push to make a dent in that. Too many men are killing themselves needlessly. I tried. I'm just so glad I failed. So I understand what it takes to be there. I never thought I would ever be there, but it's the shame and the lack of respect that you have, the hatred you have for yourself. You detest yourself when you're at that stage, and you're no use to anybody on the earth. So I understand that, but I've got to try and find out a way of communicating that in such a way that men do reach out, because they are the worst at reaching out.
Yeah. And you said about the pillars. What are they? I believe it's the 6 pillars that you talk about. What exactly are they?
Well, when we did the organisational stress risk assessments, we had, I can't remember how many tens of thousands of people actually go through that. And although we had the 49 management standard questions that the health and safety executive put together, we also had a section with around about the same, if not more, about their personal life, but we kept them into similar segments. So it was like demands on them, pressures on them, things they couldn't cope with, so that when we took the results from the audits and used all the algorithms and cogitated it all together, we could bring out different results. And these were the 6 things that over the last 25 years I have seen that if you're suffering with stress or stress-related conditions, these are the 6 key areas that always affect people. So the 6 pillars are about making sure that you're hydrated, making sure that you're eating correctly, making sure that you're going to get some laughter back in your life, making sure that you've got someone that you can speak to. It doesn't necessarily have to be a professional, but someone who you can bare your soul to. And that's really hard for most men, because we're not trained to do that. That you've increased your levels of activity and you haven't just become a couch potato. I spent up to 5 days at a time just rocking in a chair in my lounge with my head going at 3,000 miles an hour with thoughts. I lost close on 5 stones in, I think, the first 5 to 6 weeks when I was ill, when I finally went off the edge of the precipice. So activity, and the one big one that every single person, whether or not they were stressed or not, this is one of the big things, was sleeping disorders and how poorly most people sleep these days. And what I found, those 6 pillars were the ones that affected people's mind, body and emotions, their MBE, which is the other thing that I look at. And although you can help somebody psychologically, because most human beings don't fall at the first hurdle, we like to get up and try. I say most, you always meet some that fall at every hurdle and think it's the worst thing that's ever happened to them. But I'm talking about people that get really seriously ill from it. I don't degrade anybody that is ill from it, but there's degrees within the illness itself. And when people are really that ill, then these pillars need to be looked at, because their body, their mind, body, and emotions have taken such a battering that everything needs help. And it's understanding that, and understanding that you can't always put emotions into words. And I think that's the benefit of working with people, because sometimes just a look and they know you understand, because it sounds stupid. And to be honest, unless you've suffered a mental health disorder, when you speak to somebody, unless they've suffered or an expert in this field, they don't understand you. And I used to spend a lot of time working with the person's partners to try and give them an overview of what's going on, because their other half is suffering a mental health disorder. They may be a little mad. And if you've got a sane mind, you're judging that person with a sane mind. They don't make sense. And it becomes very frustrating and hard for them, and can kill a lot of relationships. So you have to look at the holistic approach when somebody's been really ill. You can't just take one part of it. Like if they just went and hired a gym bunny to try and get physically fit again, if their head isn't right and their emotions aren't right, that isn't going to be the cure all. So when they've got to that certain point where they've been battling this for years, as most people do by the time they fall off the cliff, if they do fall off the cliff, then there's a lot of work there to be done to put them back together. And that's why I look at that holistic side, and that's why the 6 pillars are so important to me.
And what advice would you give to people with low mood?
I mean, low mood, I know everything has definitions, but behind all of this, there's usually negative thinking. And every single person is different. If you've been prescribed with it, you may have been put on some drugs, and those drugs will allow you to get on with everyday life. But I find it often zombies people. They're not living life. They're just putting one foot in front of another. And if I'm going to help somebody, I want them to not just live life as they did before. I want them to be better than they have ever been, and know that life is for living, and that there always hope. So the only thing I would say to anybody is there is always hope, even at your darkest point. I have been there. You don't try to commit suicide unless you are in the darkest place you could ever be. I never, ever, ever would have thought I would ever get to that point prior to it happening. I mean, talk about being confident to the point of maybe being, some people would say, a bit arrogant or a bit cocky. I used to just think I was quite lively and friendly and a bit noisy. And some people got me. Thankfully, Mandy did. So, but yeah, there's always hope. There is always hope. If somebody can get through this, then you can, because you are born with innate good mental health. That never goes, that never disappears, but it's clouded. Like the weather, it's always sunny above the clouds. So don't concentrate on the clouds, be positive, because the sun is always there on the other side. And you can get into this hole and this darkness where you don't see any hope, you don't see any way forward. Well, the only way forward I saw was checking out. And at that point of being there with the knife was one of the most amazing moments of serenity I've ever had in my life. Because at that point, I was leaving all the anguish and the turmoil and all the hurt. And that was a really surreal point, because I was so calm. But I know since then, having gone into the 3 Ps, that was my universal wisdom talking to me. and stopping those thoughts. It stopped the thoughts. That's why I felt so good, not because I was about to kill myself. How can you feel good about killing yourself? You can't, can you?
No.
But for 20 years, I'd always thought that somebody else had saved me by coming home. But when I relived it properly, I sat there for about 2.5 hours, and universal wisdom was so clever. It stopped the thoughts. So for the first time in years, I was actually sitting there with an empty mind. And that's what stopped me committing suicide. And then the person came home, and you don't commit suicide in front of somebody. It's just a big no-no, isn't it? If nothing else, they're trying to stop you anyway, so that doesn't work. And I just feel so elated that with finding the 3 Ps and marrying that up with coaching, for me, is so fantastic, because therapy takes people back. And if you go back, you invoke those memories, you will feel the same. You know, if you break your leg once, it doesn't not hurt the second time. It hurts possibly more because you know what's coming. So therapy drags you back through all of that. And I'm not saying it's not right, because some people need therapy sometimes. And some of the stuff I do is still sort of airs on the therapy side, depending what a busy mind somebody has and what state they come to me in. Sometimes they need that time to calm and quieten their thoughts before they can hear you.
And you burn out, is that the same as being low mood? Is the low mood and then you go into burnout?
Low mood is way before burnout. Stress isn't actually classed as a medical illness, but the symptoms of stress are. But burnout is seen as a medical illness. And if you're suffering with burnout, if you've been prescribed with burnout, you are in a very, very, very serious state. Most people, well, a lot of people that suffer burnout will never live the same life again. And a lot of people never recover. It'll haunt them for the rest of them. Burnout is extremely serious. If somebody said to me they had cancer, I treat that the same as somebody saying they've got burnout.
Okay. And what advice would you give to somebody that's suffering from PTSD?
Well,
having suffered it yourself, would you give them?
You've got to ask for help, and it sounds ridiculous because I didn't. I only took the help when I was taken off duty as a police officer. I'd actually hit somebody in a cell block, and luckily they didn't take that any further. And thankfully, the female sergeant had a best friend who'd suffered with stress, and sort of recognised it. I went to see the force surgeon. They took me off duty and insisted I go through occupational health, insisted that I would see somebody. But even at that point, I didn't think I needed help. I was still blind to it. In reality, I knew I was failing. It was just as a man, I could never say that. Back then, anyway. Now, totally different. A man who's able to understand and live with his emotions and embrace his emotions is a much stronger man than the man I was brought up to be.
And you do your talk and walk. So you explained a little bit that you're out in nature. So do you start talking to them as you walk in, or do you wait for them to start talking to you? How does that work for people that are sort of thinking, well, what's the difference between the coaching that perhaps I do, where I'm sitting down either on a Zoom call or with somebody in a chair, coaching them that way?
There's not really much difference in the technique, Karen, to be fair, although making notes is obviously a lot harder. So you have to have a good memory. It's exactly the same basis as I would any other coach. You know, you have to find out, you do your induction first of all. Let's find out what they want to do, why they want to do it. Let's get a contract signed to state what they're looking to achieve. And then when we go out walking, you go into coach mode. And as coaching isn't teaching, and it's being their advocate, you've still got to pose the questions that are going to set you out from anybody else. You're still going to have to dig deep. You still have to have the same principles. But it's being out in nature gives people the freedom. It also gives them a comfort blanket as well. And science backs this up all the way. I mean, some of the latest science is saying that half an hour on a park bench is worth more than 2 hours of counselling. So, you know, and they're finding out more and more and more things about the power of nature. And it just gives me that edge to calm those people that are often suffering with anxiety and low mood and that sort of thing. But it also gives you that space to be creative, and also gives you that quiet time.
Yeah.
And because I'm walking next to them, I don't find it's as confrontational as face on. Not that has to be confrontational, but you're walking side by shoulder. You've got their shoulder. You're not in front of them or behind them. You're not above them or below them. You're equal to them. Yeah. So I'm very positive about that. That's one of the big things. Just because you pay me to help you doesn't mean that I'm something special. I'm here in service to you. And I'm your advocate all the time to make sure we can get the best of you. And I know from the 3 Ps, they have the answers inside them. And it's our job to get them to believe in themselves again and to see that they have all the wisdom they ever needed inside of them.
So if you have to live your life again, would you change anything?
No, because if I hadn't have had the breakdown, I wouldn't have this passion. If I didn't have this passion, I wouldn't be living the life I am now.
Well, thank you very much, Neale, for joining me. Has anybody got any questions for Neale?
Yeah, I have one. Hi, Neale. I have a question for you. When you do your coaching and you're outside and with your client, have you ever been in a situation where the client has walked off and left you there alone?
Yes. Sometimes they need a moment, and you feel that. You know, a good coach isn't the one who can just remember all the questions. A good coach who can be present. You feel the client if you're present with them, and that being present always directs your questions or how you are with them. And you can tell sometimes when somebody just needs that bit of time out. So, but nobody's walked off in a huff and not come back, if that's what you meant.
Thank you.
Good question.
Yeah. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy.
Else got any questions? No? Well, thank you very much, Neale, for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed it. I feel like a thorn in between all these roses now. So nice to see you again, Kay. Nice to meet you for the first time, Mandy.